Hi everyone. This is the third of the 7 habits of highly effective people. It's called putting first things first, which basically means you're effectively managing your life. It's basically the physical creation of the second habit, which is beginning with the end in mind. Basically, the whole moral is that it's okay if you don't do everything that comes along. Just focus on the highest priorities and say no to everything else. And of all the 4 human endowments, the independent will is the important one to this. Basically, acting free of other influences. The first thing I'd like to show you is the time management matrix. There are two variables here, urgent and important. Urgent, when something's urgent, it basically acts on you. Like, a ringing bell or a phone call. Important, if something's important, it means it contributes to a certain result that you're looking for. And here are here are 4 ways to spend time. The first is always in Quadrant 1. Stress, burnout, crisis managing, always putting out fires. Here's Quadrant 3, was on urgent and not so important manners. A lot of people in the Quadrant 3 people often believe they're in Quadrant 1 when really they're in Quadrant 3. Oh, and the Quadrant... Oh, there are people who often spend time in Quadrant 1. They often escape to Quadrant 4, just for a little pleasure here and there, and blah 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 blah. Then you have people who spend all their time in Quadrants 3 and 4. They are totally irresponsible, far from jobs, depend on others, or institutions for basics. Oh, for Quadrant 3 people, they focus on they're focused short term. Crisis managers, reputation chameleon characters. They set goals and plans that are worthless. They feel victimized, out of control, shallow or broken relationships. And there's the other people who spend most of their time in Quadrant 2 and a little time in Quadrant 1. And this is the effective way to spend your time. Basically, you have to do vision, perspective, balance, discipline, control, and a few crises here and there. When you spend most of your time in Quadrant 2 and shrink the time in Quadrant 1, it's basically spending time in Quadrant 2 on things that are important but they're not urgent. Effective people they're opportunity-minded, they're not problem-minded. All the 7 habits belong in the Quadrant 2, and they come from a principle center. It's a function of independent will, self-discipline, integrity, and commitment. Sometimes integrity is on the line, and sometimes Quadrants 3 and 4 try to take over Quadrant 2. See, when you're principle-centered and you have the self-awareness and consciousness, to provide a high degree of security, guidance, wisdom for yourself, to use your independent will, maintain integrity to the important. Basically, it's basically helpful to stay in helps people stay in Quadrant 2. I mean, we can't ignore the crisis and the problems of Quadrant 1, but we can certainly shrink them. So basically, by saying no, you choose your priorities, You need a big yes inside. If you're principle-centered, you can make that judgment very well. So here's a criteria to organize Quadrant 2. It is managed from a principle center, and using the knowledge from a mission statement to be a personal one. It has to be coherent. It has to have balance. It has to have a Quadrant 2 focus. Needs a people dimension. Has to be flexible. It has to be portable. So organizing Quadrant 2. So identify your roles, select certain goals, and then schedule and adapt daily. So here's a schedule of what what your schedule will kind of look like. You'd have your weekly schedule and the roles and goals on the left side. So write down all the roles, and write down a goal for each one of them, and then make your schedule. Oh, and when you manage on a weekly basis, it allows more flexibility. It prevents problem. It's a good way to prevent major problems from happening, as opposed to managing on a daily basis. When you manage it on a greater time frame, you have more flexibility. So there are 4 different generations of time management. We'll start off with the first generation. The course of least resistance consists mostly of notes and checklists. There's no priority, no correlation with values and purpose. They don't produce a lot, no production capability. They're undependable, irresponsible. They have little control and self-esteem. It's not a very good way of managing time. His second generation is very much like the first, except it consists more of calendars and appointment books instead of notes and checklists. And there's no correlation with values and purposes as well, as I said with the first one. Of course, the third generation, this is the generation that takes a bigger step forward. It's about prioritizing values, worth of activities, and goal setting. Daily planning helps accomplish goals and activities, and scheduling a time. Efficiency often clashes with relationships. So often, people often revert to first or second generation techniques. Oh, and one of the downside to third generation time management is it limits vision. It focuses on urgent and not importance. Importance is not even questioned. Prioritizes, the Quadrant 1 and 3 activities of the day. There's no Quadrant 2. There's no provision for managing roles. Lacks realism. Creates overscheduling. And people get frustrated, and therefore they escape to Quadrant 4. So, now we have a fourth generation, which is about managing ourselves. More importantly than managing time, focuses on relationships and results. It brings in the idea that people are more important than things. And this is a generation of time management that encourages Quadrant 2 activities to understand and center life around principles, clear expression, to purposes and values to direct daily decisions. Helps create balance in life, and it rises above limitations of daily planning. And it empowers the use of self-awareness and consciousness to maintain integrity to principles and purposes that are important when values conflict with plans. So now let's compare the third and fourth generation. The fourth generation of time management is more advanced than the third because it's principle-centered. You can see the time in the context of importance and effectiveness. It's conscience-directed. You can organize life in harmony with values and gives freedom to subordinate schedule to higher values. Defines your unique mission, your values, and Unique mission, give you the purpose and direction to spend time. Helps you balance your life, all your activities, goals, roles, and whatever. The context is greater. Organizing through a weekly basis. You touch with the deepest values by reviewing key roles. And it focuses on relationships and time, but it focuses more on relationships primarily and secondarily on time. And once again, I'll put the exercises in the description box. Oh, and for one of them, there's an appendix from this book that I want to put on here. So here it is. See ya!